Well, early last month, of course, it was announced that the House Select Committee was going to hold public, televised primetime hearings on the investigation into what happened on January 6th. Now, many were skeptical of this move at first, but some have changed their opinions about it. Deputy opinion editor at Newsweek, Batya Ungar Sargon, was originally hesitant over the primetime coverage and now feels that there's something at least to learn about the 2021 Capitol attack.
Author of Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, joins us now to discuss. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so tell us more about, how your opinion has changed about these hearings.
Yeah, so I started out super skeptical, for a number of reasons. For starters, I just felt like that was sort of, the most covered day in American history. Like, what could we possibly still have to learn about what happened? Then we all watched it live, right? I also feel deeply, deeply disgusted by politicians who have, skyrocketing crime in their own districts and they won't do anything about it. And meanwhile, they won't stop talking about, the sort of crimes that happened on January 6th. Demanding that we endlessly empathize with them when they have no empathy for the victims of crime in their own district. And, I felt that it was very, very partisan. It was a real shame to me that there were no Trump supporters on the commission who would cross-examine the witnesses. And it really seemed to me like this was yet another attempt by Democrats who are certain that Trump is going to be the nominee in 2024 and also certain that they can't beat him to prevent him from, being competitive at the ballot box, essentially. So I still believe pretty much all of those things. However, watching the hearings, I am learning things that I didn't know, things that I do think are very important in terms of thinking about who is best suited to carry on, President Trump's legacy. Is it him or is it possibly somebody else? Because there are things coming out that I didn't know that the committee, because of the power of subpoena, was able to find out. So I sort of changed my mind about it. And the final thing that made me very, very happy to be watching these is that, people tend to use January 6th as evidence of, America's crumbling democracy, when what's coming out during the hearings is really how strong our democracy is and how fully staffed our government is by people who are deeply patriotic and were willing to stand up for our country, even when the most powerful person on the planet was demanding that they not do so. So they're leaving me feeling quite optimistic about America as well.
I think I don't know. I guess I'm still in the former camp of thinking that there's not a lot more to learn. Obviously, there's more shading of the details of exactly what happened. Trump's literal behavior, moment to moment. Did he grab the steering wheel? Did he know that the protesters were armed? All that kind of stuff. But to my mind, it just doesn't. I guess I had already made up my mind based on what we saw day of, a year ago, 2 years ago, more than a year ago, that Trump was largely responsible for this. I don't think he's responsible in any criminal or legal sense. I think it's pretty clear he was morally responsible for saying things that were not true and then giving this, kind of inflammatory speech that was the proximate cause for people attacking the Capitol. And I think he should not be president on that basis. And that was already my opinion. Right. I'm not learning. And though there's obviously people who disagree, right? People think the latest information it opens the door to actual incitement charges. We discussed this on the show last week. I'm actually not seeing. I don't understand how Trump says. He says to peacefully and patriotically march. He does say the line about fight like hell or whatever it was. But even if he knows they're armed, he didn't actually tell them. It's not illegal for them to be armed, right? The protesters can be armed. You don't put the First Amendment and the Second Amendment together and then suddenly you've done something wrong. But he didn't ever tell them to go into the building. If he said to go into the building, then yeah, I think that's incitement, or maybe it's more than incitement. Maybe it's organizing illegal behavior. But that's the part of it that it's just not connecting for me. So I don't know. What do you think?
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I don't know that the criminal case has been made yet. I've seen legal scholars on both sides of this. But I think the moral case is being made in a very powerful way, and in a way that's powerful even with people who believe that his legacy was incredibly important and that what he represented while in office was incredibly important. But it's become so clear that, if in 2016, when he was running, the vast majority of what he talked about was jobs, NAFTA, the way that the working class has been totally abandoned by the elites in this country on both sides, and how he was going to disrupt that and represent those people. It was all about, they have stolen everything from you. That was his message to America. And now what the image that's coming out from that day and from that day forth is, all he talks about now is they've stolen everything from me. It's me, me, me. And I think that shift is becoming increasingly apparent even to the most MAGA people that I know. And I think that that's important that happened in the public sphere. We may have been convinced of that beforehand, but 20 million Americans have tuned in to watch these hearings. And that too has changed my mind a little bit. I thought, oh, nobody's going to watch these, but people are very interested, and people are learning a lot from them.
I mean, well, of course people are interested, right? We said that this was the most watched day in American history. Not that I would, concede that, but if that were the case, well, there's a why, right? This is obviously a big deal. This is outrageous. It feels very unprecedented. And while I acknowledge that Democrats and Republicans are obviously engaged in a battle amongst each other, and there is political incentive to go after the Republicans and vice versa, here in this case, it didn't just come out of nowhere why people think that this is evidence of a crumbling democracy. It's because we have a democracy. We had an election. Someone won, somebody lost, and the president, instead of gracefully conceding his loss and leaving, he engaged in a series of rhetoric that emboldened people to go armed and storm a Capitol and all of the outrageousness that ensued. So obviously there was a lot for us to learn there. And I think, like you said, you're seeing that now with the fact that so many Americans have tuned in because we want to know how this happened. What did they know? What didn't they know? Who all was involved? We know what Trump's rhetoric was. We know what Trump's involvement is, and we know what the rhetoric has been even afterwards. But there's a lot more that we don't know in terms of maybe other Republicans' culpability. And I understand why there wouldn't be Trump and MAGA people on the commission because, look, that much we know, that the rhetoric from Trump and MAGA in this camp has fueled this. So obviously they wouldn't be sitting there in commission. That's how I would take that.
I will just say that they did not recover any arms from anybody who stormed the Capitol, right? Nobody who actually entered the Capitol has been charged with having any weapons on them. And so I think that's very important to keep in mind as well when thinking about, questions of incitement, right? Questions about, Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. It's very important, I think, to keep the kinds of questions in mind that, had there been a Trump supporter on the committee, they may have asked in cross-examination.
Well, I will say this as a defense attorney, the people accused of crimes in the insurrection were woefully undercharged, right? So I wouldn't use the reflection of what their charges are.
You think they were undercharged?
Oh, 100%. Not in terms of a world where I want to advocate for more criminal charges or our criminal system to be larger, but I'm saying based on the criminal system that we have presently, right. Yes, many of the people involved in the insurrection were charged. They were charged with misdemeanors, low-level things. I saw even violations that things were pled to. Yes, they were very.
There are a lot of people spending months and months in solitary confinement over it, though, right? But you're saying that's normal. That's typical of
exactly.
Which I think is
exactly. And in
right.
a world again, and a lot of them were released. They're out on bail. They're doing different things. They're pleading to violations. They're taking fines. Those I have clients charged with far less, lower misdemeanors, all kinds of petty theft that have gotten more consequences. So I wouldn't take the fact that a lot of these judges have been sympathetic and went easy on a lot of these insurrectionists as a reflection of the crime or what they did being less serious. It's just a reflection of our criminal system treats certain populations.
Well, Representative Liz Cheney was recently questioned on January 6th, the future of the GOP.
Are you worried about what that means for the country to see a former president prosecuted, a former president who is a likely candidate, who may in fact be running for president against Biden? It would be Biden's Justice Department. It would be prosecuting.
I have greater concern about what it would mean if people weren't held accountable for what's happened here. I think it's a much graver constitutional threat if a president can engage in these kinds of activities and, the majority of the president's party looks away, or we as a country decide we're not actually going to take our constitutional obligation seriously. I think that's a much more serious threat.
Can the Republican Party survive in the way you've known it if Donald Trump is again chosen?
It can't survive if he's our nominee.
No.
No. I think that he can't be the party nominee, and I don't think the party would survive that. I believe in the party, and I believe in what the party can be and what the party can stand for, and I'm not ready to give that up. Those of us who believe in Republican principles and ideals have a responsibility to try to lead the party back to what it can be.
Cheney also discussed whether she would run for president in 2024, something that I think tens of people are calling for. I don't know her.
So do you run for president? Do you see yourself running for president as a way to prevent what you say would be the destruction of the party, ultimately damaging to our country?
I haven't made a decision about that yet, and I'm obviously very focused on my reelection. I'm very focused on the January 6th committee. I'm very focused on my obligations to do the job that I have now, and I'll make a decision about 24 down the road. But I think about it less in terms of a decision about running for office and more in terms of, as an American and as somebody who's in a position of public trust now, how do I make sure that I'm doing everything I can to do the right thing, to do what I know is right for the country, and to protect our Constitution.
I don't know, Batya, what do you think? Liz Cheney for president? I mean, it's just not, it's just such a fantasy, right? I mean, she's not, her only supporters are kind of like resistance liberals. She has no credibility. Even if she, and I share her views about Donald Trump's unfitness to be president.
I do share her
absolutely.
views there.
But she is not a kind of the right messenger for this because she has no credibility in this party she's trying to reform.
Yeah, it's like how many Democrats are going to vote for a totally pro-life Republican, right? Just because she hates Donald Trump. I mean, when I talk to people, and again, like when I talk to the most MAGA people that I know, Liz Cheney's not the name that's coming up. Ron DeSantis's name is coming up a lot. And, there's some polls out already showing him ahead of Trump. That is definitely going to increase, as we get closer and closer to 2024. So to me, this is like very much wishful thinking. And I think that January 6th was a travesty. Donald Trump's actions on that day were horrifying, and his rhetoric since then has been really, really, really terrible, and he has besmirched his legacy. At the same time, that legacy stands. He took a party that was, completely focused on the rich and on the donor class and on, people like Liz Cheney, who are very, very disconnected from where their working class base is at, and he forced people to take the concerns of the working class seriously. He got rid of NAFTA. He talked a lot about immigration, which is a big concern for working class Americans. He started a trade war with China. He put out all those tariffs, which I know, Robbie, you're not in favor of that stuff, but who is his working class base. I mean, he really made them feel seen, and the numbers are in. I mean, the economy was working so well, even for people in the bottom 25 percentile, and they know that. And that axe he took to the neoliberal consensus, I mean, that was extremely important. And I think that the divide that you're seeing in the Republican Party is like, yes, it's over like the horrifying events of January 6th for sure. But more importantly, there's a much deeper divide happening over economic issues. And I think it's very important that whoever replaces him keeps their eye on that ball. And I think it could be that DeSantis is ready to do that.
I don't think that the insurrection besmirched Donald Trump's legacy. I think it reflected negatively on America and our democracy, and I think it impacts our own legacy internationally negatively. But I think it's very much so in keeping with Donald Trump and his presidency. All the rhetoric, he was emboldening these kinds of people, the entire administration, which is exactly why so many people rushed out in record numbers to vote him out. So I actually don't think it besmirched his legacy. But I do agree with you that Liz Cheney is not the best messenger. I don't think she has any. I don't think she has a hope in the world of
She
winning.
can't even win. She can't win a House Republican primary for the House in Wyoming.
Exactly. So I don't think she has any shot at becoming president. But I do very much so agree with her that it is a dangerous precedent to allow something like this to happen and for the president to just get away with it. I think it's dangerous in and of itself that you could have a sitting president just decide, you know what?
Right.
Even though everybody before me has rolled with democracy and how this goes, they lose an election and they concede and they help their successor, transition. Here, we did not see that.
Yes, and I will say that you might have thought, and I'm curious for your take on this, Batya, before we let you go. Even if Trump's effect, even if you're wildly positive about the effect Trump had on the Republican Party, he went out on such a sour note and such self-inflicted harm for the party, given what happened on January 6th and what he said before it. You might have expected more Republicans not perhaps to go the full Liz Cheney route, but it seems like they all, like a lot of them, leaders, want him gone. They don't want to continue to have to talk about this or defend this, but no one wants to be the person to push him out the door. And so there's a lot of not doing anything and allowing him to still kind of claim the mantle of leader of the party in a way that is clearly not good for the GOP anymore when they have a DeSantis or whoever else waiting in the wings.
Look, I mean, nobody ever went broke betting on the cravenness of politicians, right? Like that's definitely, but at the same time, I will say, I think a lot of them, like Trump, are very afraid of their voters. That's the problem with America today is there's a sort of crisis of leadership where people are following rather than leading. And I do admire Liz Cheney. I do think that she is leading and she has taken on her side in a way that's going to maybe cost her political career. You don't see a lot of that anymore. But at the same time, from a purely Democratic sort of lowercase d point of view, I'm not sure that it's terrible for them to be sort of waiting, testing the waters, waiting to see where the base goes, waiting to see who the electorate wants. If the electorate chooses Donald Trump, for us to catastrophize about that, there is something anti-democratic about that. If that is who they choose, I happen to think that's not who they're going to pick. I happen to think that his support is waning, and I think he knows it.
I think so too.
But you know what? We'll see. Prognostication is a totally no journalist should ever do that because right. But the question will be, I feel like I want to say ask me this question in a year. If they choose him again, we'll have to really revisit that question. But right now, I really feel like the wind is in the DeSantis sails and it's sort of pushing him forward.
But you hit on a really good point that Republicans have decided finally, eventually, a lot of them at least, they're listening to their loudest, most activated, most motivated voters.
And
Democrats haven't figured that one out.
I was going to push back. I was going to say I think that's a good thing. I think politicians should be scared of their voters. That's how it works. The people that are putting you in power, you should be answerable to them. You should be doing what they want. So I think that's actually why you see a lot of success amongst Republicans. And I'm constantly saying this. They listen to their voter base, crazy or not, bigoted or not. In my opinion, they listen to them. And I think that's important. And I think that's why you see a lot of lack of success on Democrats' part. Democrats voters say something and Democrats come out and condemn the voters or criticize the voters and say, oh no, that's not what they want. They want a moderate centrist platform that their own voters continuously tell them, no, we need you more left. So I actually think that's a good thing that Republicans do.
You won't believe this one neat trick for winning elections. Number 19 will surprise you. It's do what your voters want. Batya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.